Yo, yo, yo. This is Candy B Knittin. I'm Candy B. I be knitting. And this week I want to get you caught up on a project you haven't seen in a few weeks, and then we're going to talk swatching. So first things first, I have here my Silver Bells by TinCanKnits. And last time y'all saw this, I was still in the yoke working the lace work chart. Since then, I have separated for sleeves, worked the body, and just today I bound off the body. Yeah. So this is that. It's a top-down circular yoke. I chose bobbles. I'm doing this in, what do you call that? Lion Brand Sakis held double with a mohair acrylic blend. And this is what it looks like so far. So all I have to do now is pick up stitches for the sleeves and knit 2 sleeves and then bound off and I'll be done. For this project, I chose not to, they have you continue the lace chart into the body and into the sleeves. I chose to just work it like I would a normal or traditional top-down yoke sweater. I did not want to have bobbles going down the entire front of my body just because I was kind of concerned about the abrasion. This is my first time knitting bobbles and it was the most fun experience. If I do this sweater again, I probably will skip the bobbles and then continue the lace chart because I do think it looks nice continuing the lace chart. The other thing I saw too when I was looking at the pattern was a lot of people seemed confused as to whether or not you were supposed to continue the lace chart under the arm. And that was an issue, take this off, an issue for me as well because I didn't necessarily, like I said, with abrasion and friction, I didn't necessarily want all that delicate lace in the underarm area where it's gonna get felted and fuzzy anyway. But that was a happy accident. If you remember the last time I talked about the sweater, I was surprised to learn that there were no short rows in the pattern. And I was debating what to do about that. And then I looked at some Ravelry projects and a lot of people noticed that there were no short rows before starting the project. And so they did their short rows right at the top of the back of the neck. I had started the lace chart and started the bobbles before I realized that there were no short rows. And part of the reason I believe there are no short rows is because of the lace. I don't know how it seems like it would be what do you call that? An unnecessary amount of difficulty to work short rows with lace. I'm not sure if, I've never seen that in a pattern before, so I'm assuming that's the reason why. What I did was, because I was just like, well, the pattern doesn't have short rows. So I looked at some Ravelry projects. Some people noticed there were no short rows, did short rows, like I said, at the top of their, collar. And then, you know, of course the pattern's written without short rows and I'm looking at pattern pictures. I'm looking at the actual official photos for the pattern and it looks fine. And so I was just like, you know, probably will work out, especially with this lacy yoke. It's probably quite forgiving. And so what I did was I finished the yoke and then I steamed it with a hand steamer to try to get it as close to like final measurements as possible. Then I put it on a couple of large circular needles and tried it on just to see what it would look like. And it felt fine. Like I said, the traditional pictures looked like they would be fine. My thought was, if I don't do short rows and then I end up every single time I'm wearing it, pulling the sweater like this, pulling the sweater like this, it's gonna make me not wear the sweater. There is a chance that I can make the sweater to pattern and it work out perfectly fine and everything's wonderful. But I have never had a negative experience with short rows. There was no way I would do the short rows and be unhappy with the short rows, long story short. Like, it was all positive on the short rows and then a 50-50 chance I wouldn't like it without the short rows. So it's just like, I have nothing to lose. I know how to do short rows. It's maybe, you know, it's a lot of stitches because I'm working it across the entire back, rather than if I had remembered to do them up at the back of the collar. But, you know, an extra couple of hours to be able to wear a sweater that I've been working on for months, it made sense for me. So what I did was I own the Simple Sweater by TinCanKnits, which is a top-down circular yoke, and it comes in multiple different gauges. And so I found the gauge that was closest to this sweater pattern, and it actually ended up having the same stitch count and same gauge as this. The gauge was slightly different because this is fingering weight held double with a mohair. But the worsted weight Simple Sweater, the stitch count is very much similar. The difference is, and the thing I had to keep into account and that made it a little bit more of a head scratcher for me, is that I was just like, oh, I'll just split for sleeves and I'll just follow the instructions for the Simple Sweater the rest of the way. The issue with that is the Simple Sweater has an even amount of stitches in the body and in the sleeves. This Silver Bell sweater has an odd number of stitches. And that reason is because of the stitch motif. And so if you notice, and I hope you notice because I did a little bit of work to figure this out, this is a lace chart repeat going across, and the intention of the pattern is to have one motif straight down the middle of your front. And so that, to make it a perfect point in the front so it's completely symmetrical, it has to be an odd number of stitches in the front. And so I had to do a little bit of mathing, a little bit of thinking, to make the short row. In the short rows for that pattern, the short rows are worked, which makes complete sense, so that your beginning of round is in the middle of your back. This pattern has the beginning of the round on the side and then has you shift your beginning of round so that your motif is still symmetrical. And so there was just a little bit of very long story short, there were maybe, I was this close to tears because one of my faults as a knitter, my biggest weakness as a knitter is that I can't count. And so literally I would do a thing, I would work a short row, or, you know, I would be planning out where my sleeves were going to be, and I would count and my count would be off. Then I would count again, and then I would have the right amount of stitches. And then on top of that, this is mohair held double, or mohair held with fingering weight yarn. So it's incredibly fuzzy. And so I'm trying to read my stitches, trying to keep count of everything, trying to make sure my math works. I ended up putting a stitch marker dead in the front center. In the end, the sweater ends up being like half a round longer on one side. No one's going to notice any of these things. No one's going to notice if there's one extra stitch on one sleeve than the other. My stitch count ended up working out despite my brain being absolutely frazzled. But I really do strive to get it as close to pattern as possible, because if there's one stitch off, then that one stitch is going to like haunt me the rest of the pattern, because it's going to throw all my other math out. But like I said, luckily I was not continuing that lace pattern into the body. It's pure stockinette into the bottom. The other thing I did differently, which I do differently with all my sweaters, I'm assuming because my proportions are a bit different than what they call standard sizing. I have a shorter waist than most patterns call for. So my waist is usually a good, depending on what length I'm looking for. Sometimes I have pretty much two modes: cropped, which is right at my natural waist where my belly button is. That's like the narrowest part of my body. Or if I go to a full length, I like to stop right at my hip bones. And this pattern says like 13 inches of body before even starting the 2 inches of rib. And I also like a little, they want 1 3/4 inches of rib. I need at least 2 to 3 inches of rib for what I believe is a nice clean looking ribbing. And so usually I shorten my body to get that extra ribbing and so that it sits at the place I want it to sit. I don't want a whole bunch of fabric draping over my bum. And so yeah, the pattern calls for like I said, 13 inches of body before even thinking about doing the rib. And some sweaters I've gone from 9 inches to maybe 12 inches at the most, probably 10 to 11. I think this one is 11 inches, so exactly 2 inches shorter than the pattern calls for. Just because, yeah, I don't want a whole lot of extra fabric at my bottom, and I want my rib to be a little bit longer than the pattern calls for. So that's that. We're chugging along. Cast off, I just went up a needle size for my cast off at the bottom so it wasn't too tight. It is rolling a little bit, so I don't know what to do about that, but hopefully that will block out. And hopefully over the next week, I'll get some sleeves done, and then this will be done. And then I guess I'll wait till it's not 110 degrees outside to wear it. So like I said, I finished the yoke. I had to do a little bit of brain work to figure out my short rows, and then I was on to body. And so once I got to the body, I was just like, oh, I can kind of maybe start thinking about what my next project is going to be, because now I'm like, you know, flying through this. And so that means pulling out yarn, pulling out needles, pulling out patterns, and swatching. So we're going to get into swatching, and I'm going to kind of talk you through what I'm thinking, and hopefully maybe have some good discussion on the reasons to swatch and some tips about swatching. So yeah, like I said, I finished that yoke, and point A about swatching for me is that it's a good way to kind of just relax my brain, because it's purely an experiment. I know it's not going to be a final project necessarily. It'll help me get to my final project, but it's not necessarily, I can't really go wrong with it. And it's like, I know I'm probably going to rip it out anyway. So it's like a nice low stakes way to kind of keep knitting without the stress of one of these bigger projects that I'm working on. So the first thing I worked on is, and this is no project in mind, this knitting needle is one of two, obviously, and it is a Brittany needle. And I was with my kids. They had one of their extracurriculars was meeting at a church that we're not affiliated with the church. The extracurricular was just meeting there, and the church at the same time was cleaning out a bunch of stuff. And so they had a whole, just like office supplies, old books, etc., etc. And of course, my eyes go straight to, are those knitting needles? And these are Brittany knitting needles, which when I had never heard of them before. I Googled them, and they're like known for well-made wooden needles in particular. And these are 3.5 millimeter needles, AKA US size 4. And if you are like me, which I'm assuming if you're watching this, you are, I did not grow up with people knitting around me. My first and only exposure for a very, very long time to knitting was the granny from Looney Tunes, who takes care of Tweety and Sylvester, and she knits like this. And for a long time I was just like, oh, knit one, purl two, that's how knitting works, right? You can knit like that. It is actually called purler style knitting, and it's a particular way of knitting that is supposed to look aesthetically pleasing. But I just thought that was so funny, because that was my and also I thought everyone knit on straight needles, which once I started knitting, I realized that most people do not knit on straight needles. And so it was just very funny to be well into my 30s and learn about knitting, and it be completely the opposite of what I was exposed to on TV. And so I saw these, I was like, I have to have these long needles, and I have to do something parlor style. I have to teach myself to knit parlor style, because that is just, so I pulled out, my first thought was, since they are straight needles, they are long straight needles, was I could do some sort of garment knit flat and seamed. And what I have here is some Cascade Heritage, and I have 2 balls of this. It's 400 yards, fingering weight yarn, And my thought was, oh, I can knit something for one of my kids with, you know, 2 skeins of fingering weight yarn should go a long way. And maybe I could do like a vest. And they do a lot of layering with their clothes. And so I was like, oh, that'd be perfect. And so I just cast this on, and I just do like a long tail cast on and just see how many stitches so I can get a really nicely sized wide swatch so I can really see what the fabric is going to do. And the knitting experience is fine. Wooden needles tend to drag a little bit. They're not, I prefer metal needles because of the slickness and how fast it goes. This was not a huge problem. My issue with this and why it's gonna get ripped out, and I only did like an inch maybe, is I'm not feeling this color. And I don't mind knitting for other people. I love knitting for my kids. My kid came up to me and she saw this and was just like, is that for me? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, what do you think of this color? She's like, I love this color. And I think she only said that because she likes getting hand knit stuff and she likes getting things. But it's just very harsh. This yarn is very soft. I like it a lot, and I think it'll make a really nice garment, especially for a young person that does not like prickly wool. It's like a superwash sock yarn. But man, it is just orange, like the orange and the red together is just like, this is not a good experience for me. I need like colors that motivate me to keep knitting and colors that I'm interested in. So I put the pause on this. I'm thinking maybe if I held it double with something else to kind of break up that oranginess of it, or like if I striped it with something maybe, but just if I sat down and knit with this, it would not be, I have to enjoy the whole knitting experience. And so that's reason one to swatch, is to see, hey, can I, before I cast on 200 stitches, can I actually see myself knitting with this for a long time? And like I said, the needles are fine, the yarn is lovely, but this color is just, what can I say? It's my hobby, you know. Would I go out and buy my kid an orange t-shirt? Yeah, sure. But do I want to sit for a month with this yarn? No, I don't. So I'm gonna put this away for now. I'm probably gonna unravel this after this video is over. But that's project one that did not work out. Next swatch that I worked on, because I've fallen into this pocket apparently of working kind of worsted weight gauge. And so my silver bells is on size 7 needles. And so that's like, the last big project I worked on were 2 shawls, and the shawls were on size 5 and size 6 needles. So it worked really well having them worked in tandem. This time around, I had my silver bells were on my size 7 needles. And then every other project I was looking at was like, oh, you need size 7 needles. Everything was like kind of worsted weight. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so that's the other reason I wanted to get kind of far. And now I'm going to be working the sleeves on DPN so I can use my Chow Goose sets to work on a different sweater. And that's why I decided I wanted to make a garment for myself. And so project A, this is called, I'm going to put the name of the pattern in the show notes, which will be in the description box on YouTube. This is some of my hand spun, and this, I'm wanting to make a sweater vest out of this. And I think it's called it's like a very generic name that I cannot remember right now, but it's a worsted weight sweater vest pattern or slip over pattern. And I wanted to do it in my hand spun because one of my goals, and I'm thinking about my assortment of projects I haven't really done a big hand spun project, and I feel like I need to always kind of be working on, okay, what am I going to do with my hand spun, right? And so this is some Kim Dyes yarn. It's 85% wool, 15% silk, I'm pretty sure. And I have the ball bands for all of the yarn, but I did a combo spin and then plied it together. And so I don't remember what each colorway is called. Let me see. I believe this one is the lightest one, and it's called Mushroom Hunting. And it's BFL Tussa Silk, by the way. And then This one I believe is a mixture of mushroom hunting and golden light. And then this one I know for a fact is cockle-doodle-doo. But the thing about Kim Dye's yarn is that her colors always work very well together. And as a matter of fact, this golden light, I have this in boucle, and I was thinking about maybe combining the boucle yarn with my hand spun, but ultimately I decided that's doing too much. And if I say it's doing too much, that means it's really doing too much, because I love doing too much. But I figured I would do this worsted weight vest pattern because some of this yarn is a little underspun in some areas, because I have some difficulty with silk a lot of times, silk content. And so I figured if I, the way her pattern is set up, it's a striped vest. And so with striping with hand spun, I can just cut out the parts that aren't consistent or that I'm not liking, and still have like a cohesive piece with these color schemes that go well together. Long story short, this is not worsted weight. It's probably closer to a sport weight. And so I did not get gauge on size 7 needles. So I could play around with the sizing on the pattern, but it's a free pattern. So I would rather just kind of keep looking for a pattern. I probably will. Ravelry has a way of searching patterns by gauge. Like you can just type in what gauge you're getting and find patterns that match that gauge rather than forcing the gauge to match a pattern. That's usually what I do. I don't try to, because you know, some people are like, oh, you can tighten up your knitting or relax your knitting. I would rather find something that matches my knitting style and my gauge rather than try to force myself into something. Like I said, especially since it was a free pattern anyway, so I'll just find something that's more of a DK sport weight vest, which I think I might have something in one of my magazines back here. And also I'm liking this gauge. Like if I went up a needle size, it might be too holy, you know? And so it's all about finding what I like, not necessarily being like, well, I have to match the pattern and match the numbers in the pattern. It's like, oh, is it nice? Is it holy? Is it too tight and stiff? How does this feel against my skin? Am I liking the color progression I'm getting? As far as sizes of swatches, this was looking for 25 stitches, 18 rows. And so I usually try to cast on at least, like, if it's 25 stitches per 4 inches, I try to cast on at least like 30, 40, 50 stitches even. So I'm getting a nice area. And so, especially because this is hand spun, and so it's not, it actually was quite consistent though. Not bragging or anything, but if this was like one of my really wild hand spuns, I would do like a really big swatch, and then what I do is I measure the gauge in a lot of different areas of the swatch, so that I take like an average of what I'm getting, rather than like just measuring once and being like, well, this, you know, little 2-inch area here is right on gauge, it's bang on, and then you just start your project not accounting for areas where it's much thicker or much thinner yarn. But this was actually quite consistent, and I'm liking this. And then if you look at the back here, you see these strings hanging down, because this is I was swatching for a vest pattern. I wanted to see if my gauge was wildly different knitting flat here or knitting in the round here. And it wasn't, but it's just something to think about, because a lot of people tend to be tighter working stockinette flat versus stockinette in the round. And I, you know, like I said, above all else, I just want it to be consistent and get an idea of what the fabric's going to be like. So I took some notes on this swatch, and I'll probably just leave it like this for a while. It's still connected to the ball because this is hand spun. I don't necessarily, I tend to keep my swatches connected, and then if I do need the yarn, I can always unravel it. And then I just leave it connected, dip it. I have like a little wash tub, like a small, like I have a salad spinner, and that's how I block my swatches. And so this isn't going anywhere. So it's fine just like this, and I'll just sit it to the side until I figure out if, when, what, how, where I want to do with this. More likely than not, my next project is going to be from this swatch, and this is the Treysta by Jen Steingass. And this is top down color work yoke, and this is a lot of different yarn. And so, like I said, once again, on size 7 needles, the gauge for these two patterns were actually the same, which makes me think it's just like a standard worsted weight gauge. And that's definitely the reason I wanted to swatch for this, because she was calling for size 7 needles on worsted weight yarn. I usually, like, if I'm just like picking up a project and going, I usually pick a size 8 needle for worsted weight. I did get gauge in stockinette with the size 7 needle, which is fine. The issue here is size 7 for color work is way too tight for me. I felt like it was going to be too tight, but then I was just like, let me just try it and see. And I could, you know, I did the swatch and I could tell how this is like pulling in, and this is like stiff. And then down here, it's, you know, it's got a lot more stretch to it. And so I just know that I'm going to have to go up at least 1 or 2 needle sizes. I might swatch again with a bigger needle just to see. Most of this yarn is Patton's worsted wool, 100% non-superwash wool. And coming to another reason to swatch, my original color scheme was these 4 colors here. Let's see if I can get these together. 1, 2, 3, go. A lot of cool tones. So this is Jade Heather. This is a purple heather. And then I was going to do the solid navy color. And then this is some DK wool. This is good wool from Pearl Soho, which is actually DK, but then I actually read, and I swatched with it, which that's why you swatch, that it works well in worsted color work patterns because it blooms really well. So that's the light blue color here. You'll notice that there is no navy here because I originally started swatching with the navy, and when I got to the part that called for the navy, it was like really dark and not like in a, it was just very drab. Like it brought the whole mood down and it just made me sad. And I was just like, I need like a punch up color. And I thought this light blue would kind of be like my punchy color, but it was just like way too like samey sad. And so I ditched the navy. Then I was just like, okay, let's try this guy. This is some cloud spun. This is a discontinued yarn. But worsted weight, bright color. This was way too bright, which like I said, says a lot if I say it's too bright. And so I was like, okay. So I ended up ripping that out. Long story short, you see this white now in the pattern, and the white is gonna now be like my color. And these are actually 2 different whites because swatching, good time to experiment, play with things. And so I have this Wool of the Andes, worsted weight, white yarn, bing, bang, boom, have plenty of this. But I was thinking, I was like, oh, this is really, really like bright white. And one, I was concerned that because this is white wool yarn, I was concerned that the colors might bleed. And then B, I just didn't want it to be too jarring and too white. And so that's another, if you're keeping count, another good reason to swatch is to see how the yarn behaves, because I do not want to make a white color work yoke and then have purple yarn bleeding into it And then usually when yarns bleed, especially if purple bleeds, it breaks between blues and reds, and so you end up with something that doesn't even look like the original thing. And so I was just like, I have this in my stash. And this is a Lion Brand Woolies, which is acrylic wool blend. And I was just like, should I mix acrylic wool blend with 100% wool? I don't know. Let's swatch and find out. And I like this because it feels more like a warmer white. I don't know if the light in here is going to pick it up, but this just feels like a little bit creamier and a little less jarring. And this feels a little bit more stark white. You be the judge. Long story short, I swatched with both of them. I can barely tell the difference between the two colors, especially since if you see where the light blue is here, this is where the white's going to be. I don't think, and that's another thing too, this pattern calls for one main color, which has always been my purple, but swatching allowed me to pick how I was going to do contrast colors 1, 2, and 3. And so, yeah, the white is going to go here. And so I'm leaning towards just using the bright white wool of the Andes because it is 100% wool, and then I can use them all in one project, and then I can use the acrylic yarn for something that's more acrylic based. But I did swatch, and I was afraid the acrylic yarn wouldn't sit right in the wool too. And so I'm just kind of playing around with color, playing around with texture, playing around with how the wool and how the acrylic behaves. And I think it would be fine to use this yarn. It's actually a bit plumper than some of the other wool yarn, and so I think it would work well in color work. But I am leaning towards using the wool of the Andes just to be consistent, because there's a lot more projects that I can use that acrylic for. This project is more fitting for what I believe, non-superwash wool. So that's a lot of information to get from a 5x4 piece of fabric. So the other thing I do is I usually measure my swatches before I start and after I finish, just to see, does it stretch more this way? Does it stretch more that way? Does it shrink? Sometimes swatches can shrink on you. And I also wash them the exact way that I do my sweaters. I soak my sweaters and I just lay them flat. I don't pin things aggressively unless it's like a lace shawl or something like that. So I just want to see exactly how a full, or as close as possible to how a full size sweater in this type of yarn would behave. And also I have not done that much color work, and so practice makes perfect. And so that's the story here. This will probably be my next project. So I'm gonna get more in depth with this pattern a little bit later. But yeah, like I said, I wasn't trusting the needles. Also, with the swatching, like I said about the other swatch, if my gauge isn't working exactly right, trying to figure that out in relationship to what size to make. This pattern calls for 2 to 4 inches of positive ease. And I will mention now, without getting too much into the weeds about this pattern, I took for granted that it was a Jen Steingass pattern. And when I bought it, I bought the Ventersol and it was on sale, and it was just like, oh, buy one, get one half off. And so I felt like really pressured to like just pick a pattern, because I really, really wanted the Ventersol. That was like my main goal with the sale. And then I was like, well, I might as well get something else. And so I just picked this pattern. This pattern was published in 2017 and is not size inclusive. And so there's maybe like 6 sizes altogether, ranging from like, I want to say 32 inch bust, which is not inclusive of the smaller side, up to like, I want to say like 48 inch bust. Oh, actually, I have the sizes right here. We'll tell you. It goes from a 33 inch bust, 33.75 inch bust, to a 49 and 75 inch bust, which translates to 84 centimeters up to 124 centimeters. So very limited on the sizes and the size ranges. There's 7 sizes in that range. and it's 33 3/4, 35 and a half, 38 and a quarter, 41 3/4, 44 and a half, 47, 49 and 3/4. So in case you're not catching the math, there's like 2-inch increments between each size. And so that kind of put it, I am in that range. But I do like to find patterns that have a wide range of sizes. I believe that's important, but that's on me that I did not read the pattern closely, so I take full responsibility for that. But at the same time, also most traditional most patterns I've seen, the set ranges are usually more on even numbers, and so I usually go for a 40-inch bust, and most patterns have a 40-inch bust option. But now I have a 38-inch option, a 41 3/4 option, and a 44 and a half option. And I have a size 38 to 40-inch bust, and the pattern calls for 2 to 4 inches of positive ease. So I know that's a lot of numbers. The long and short of it is that I have to make some decisions about what size I'm going to make. And the swatch can help with that, as far as like looking at your gauge and seeing how the fabric behaves. And it's like, okay, usually with a sweater like this, I like a tighter fit. So I'm leaning more towards the 41-inch, but I really wish there was a 40-inch option. So something to consider, even if it's like I said, the Ventersol goes up to a 62-inch bust, which, you know, follows the Craft Yarn Council's recommendation and has a nice range within that. And so I just kind of assumed that all of her patterns were like that. So even if you're looking at a size inclusivity can change even within the same designer, is all I'm saying. So a word of caution there. Last but certainly not least, this is not technically a swatch. I used to be one of those, like, I don't swatch. Because I think it was more so I felt kind of, what's the word for it? I guess intimidated, maybe? I don't know if that's the right word for it, but I felt like when I first started knitting, I'd be like, okay, what am I swatching for? What do I even look for? If I have a problem with my swatch, what do I even do about it? And so I think it was a lot of fear. So I just would avoid doing it. But the thing about not swatching, if you don't swatch, you're still swatching, because your final project is a swatch. You just have a really giant swatch, and whether or not that was worth your time, I don't know. So I've been working on this blanket for my sister-in-law, and my thought was, this yarn it's a superwash, and I'm holding it double with this mystery yarn I got. You guys have heard me talk about this mystery yarn I got from the thrift store. And I made my daughter a sweater out of this yarn that ended up felting. And so that tells me that there is some sort of non-superwash wool component to this yarn, or at least the way it is manufactured, it causes it to fall apart. And I was just like, well, I can make a blanket, and it's just, you know, just tell her to spot clean it. It doesn't need to be thrown into a washing machine on super hot. You know, she's older. She's, you know, her kids are teenagers, and I'm thinking, you know, she's a little bit more sophisticated. She could probably handle that. But, you know, this nagging voice in the back of my head's like, do you really want to give someone a blanket that they can't put in the washing machine? Really think about that. But, you know, it's the nagging little voice back here. And then so finally I was like, you know what, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about this. And so I washed one of the squares, and you can kind of tell the difference. This one is washed, this one's unwashed, and it's, you know, fuzzy, it's stiffer. Yeah, it doesn't have that same, you know, floppy drape. And I'm just like, is it the end of the world if this is what happens to your blanket? It's still relatively soft. And I think I'm gonna pivot. And what I'm going to do is, and I haven't I thought I had made so many of these squares. I'm not even like close to, and that's why I wanted to wash them, because I'm just like, I'm not even close to a blanket amount of these squares. And you can see here, these are like stuck together. So you can tell that's really like felting. I'm not even close to a blanket amount. So I might as well, it's not taking that much time to stop the project for a second and think about what I'm doing. So I decided to pivot, and I'm going to make baskets out of these. Downstairs in my living room, I have Mr. Rulin and I were actually, I don't remember if we're at Target or Aldi or someplace, and we saw this big felt woven basket, and we both were just like, I kind of like that basket. Like, do we need a basket in our living room? No, we don't need a basket in our living room, but I like it. And we just both were like, yes, we're getting this basket. And so this basket came home with us. And what we do with the basket is we put blankets, because our house runs relatively cold. I'm a knitter, so I have blankets out the wazoo that I've made. And so it's a nice little place to stack up blankets. And so I'm thinking that I can make baskets for my sister-in-laws. And when I make a blanket out of a more appropriate yarn, I can give them to in this basket, and washing the basket and felting it will just make it stronger and more durable and more baskety. And I think that's going to be a much better use out of this yarn. And then that way I don't have to feel nervous. She doesn't have to feel nervous. And, you know, it's just a little basket to sit in your living room. So unless, like, if, you know, I end up, you know, pouring a slushie on that basket, I think I have bigger fish to fry than having to throw it in the washing machine. So it's not the end of the world if it does get washed in hot water, but at the same time, it shouldn't need to get washed that much, because it's just a decorative piece. And so that's what I'm doing with these now. I still have because it's still going to be the same amount of squares, because I'm thinking I can do 4 or 2 by 2 on the bottom, and then do 2 by 2 squares on each side. So it'll be like a cube with no lid. And so that's 20 squares right there. And so I got to get to work. I have 4 squares here that could get sewed together, and then I have to do each of the sides. So that's that. I'm going to end it there. The last thing I want to show y'all just really, really quick is this. I got this book from the library, had a used book sale. I got this book. The last time I showed y'all this book was falling apart. I have since found a YouTube video from like the University of Maryland, real low light, real low tech, but just gives you the basics of book repair. And all I needed was Elmer's glue, a paintbrush, and I was just like, oh, I might need a burnishing tool. And then the person in the video said, if you don't have a burnishing tool, see if you have a knitting needle around the house. And I was like, oh yes, I have a knitting needle around the house. And then some weights to kind of press the book down so it glues back together nicely. So I'm going to link the video that I used, because I really thought that I was gonna have to like take it to like a book repair place or rip the whole thing apart and put in a binder or something. And I fixed it with just things I had around the house, and it's holding up quite nicely now. So I wanted to share that with y'all. Aside from that, how are y'all doing? My summer is in full swing. So very busy here. I hope y'all are doing whatever brings you joy. Are you a swatcher? Do you swatch? I never swatch. I always hit gauge. I'm just a magical fairy. Are you a very careful swatcher, but you believe the swatch lies every single time? Do you find it relaxing like I find it relaxing to just go play in yarn and grab some needles and go? Let me know. As always, comment, like below, share this video with a friend, share it with an enemy. You can hit me up on Instagram. I'm at Rulude on Instagram. You can email me all about swatching, candibknittin@gmail.com. I'm also on Ko-fi as Rulude. Until next time, peace.